Hello, hello. Welcome today to Celebrity Customer Experience Riffs with me, Jill Raff, where we riff on anything and everything from employee experience to customer experience. Because I believe 100% that your employee experience will influence your customer experience. So, I want to thank you first for being with me today, for investing your time to explore why employee experience and customer experience are so intrinsically related. In fact, why they are inseparable. Now, I know that our time is our most valuable resource. So I really appreciate you being here with me today. If you're watching live, please be sure to comment. That way I can see what you have to say, your insights, and add it to the conversation so that we can really have a conversation, which is so much more fun. And if you're watching the replay, thank you for watching the replay. I really appreciate you. And comment as well. Tag me in the reply so that, again, we can continue this conversation because it's an important one. I think everything we talk about here is important, of course, but I encourage you also to share this episode or any of the previous episodes on your feed so that your audience can weigh in on the conversation so that they can learn and take some nuggets away of why it's so important that we think about our greatest assets, and that is our employees, our the inside of our company to influence the outside. Okay, so in the last several weeks, you've heard me talk a lot about the paradigm shift going on in the marketplace, the disconnect that's happening throughout the organization. In episode 73, I spoke about the massive, massive perception and delivery gap that's happening between the executive leadership, the owners of companies, and they need to identify these gaps within the companies in order to create this connection culture leading to profit. In episode 74, I talked about the need to build a bridge to fill in these gaps, to cover those gaps, to create alignment in order to have accountability. So you cannot have accountability without making sure everyone's in alignment with what you believe in, your high values of your company. But also, it cannot happen without the expectations being clearly set and created and without mutual agreement and understanding on what's expected throughout the organization. So, now let's talk a minute about who is responsible for creating those expectations, those accountabilities, and ultimately who's responsible for what's going to lead to the employee and the customer experience. So, I decided to talk about this today, besides the fact that it's a very important topic. It really was highlighted recently when speaking at an event where I was brought in to present my talk on how to become the employer of choice. And I added in a short EX to CX poll, employee experience to customer experience poll at the start to assess the pulse of the room, the people there, and what their thoughts, what their experience was around employee experience to customer experience, and ultimately who is responsible for creating that experience. And it's always so interesting to me to see the results of the people in the room, or if it's on a Zoom call, if I'm doing a presentation virtually, to really see what the response and the feeling is about those people. So, more on that in a minute. Uh, I can tell you that as someone who grew up in a fast growing franchise business, my parents and grandparents opened McDonald's number 150 in the early days. So I really know and understand the challenges of fast growing businesses. And now looking back on all of my experiences and speaking to the men and women who worked for my dad in those early days, building their lives and their careers, I can see with full clarity that the customer experience is largely created from the quality of the employee experience. And I got to see how this employee experience was created, how they built a culture of connection, a genuine connection culture, and how that created an environment where people wanted to come into work. And I think that's what we're all looking for to achieve in today's marketplace, especially where the attraction and retention is such a key issue, especially um, exacerbated by the pandemic. So, what we found is that there is this large disconnect between what the ownership, the executive leadership thinks is happening on their front line or from their customers' perspective, from what actually is happening from what the employees think and what the customers are experiencing. So, of course, this is supported by the Bain and Company statistic from their study that I use all the time because it is so crucial. And I think it really highlights and just really lays out the example of this huge disconnect. And that is, if you haven't heard me say it before, 80% of executives feel that they're delivering an outstanding, superior customer experience, while only 8% of customers agree with that. That's what the study found. Now, when I say customers, I include your employees because your employees are, in fact, your first line customers. They are those as business owners, as entrepreneurs, as leadership, executive leadership, C suite. Your employees are your customers. You have to treat them as well. You have to educate them and invest in them in the same way that you want to teach them and guide them through your example of how you want them to actually be interacting with your end customers. So, when there is this enormous gap of perception or taking ownership for who's responsible for your people, starting from the inside, which is why my proprietary process is called the inside out framework, starting from the inside and from the top, it's no wonder that there's such high turnover from both employees and turnover from your customers from bad experiences. People talk about turnover all the time and they just immediately think that it's just your employees. That's the way the term has been used. I'm trying to create some changes and shifts in our mindset and our approach in this business because turnover is not just your employees, it's also your customers. And we all know that it's much more expensive to bring in new customers than it is to maintain your existing ones. All right. So now this brings us back to my EX to CX poll, which I spoke about, that I use in some of my trainings or sometimes even in my talk, because I like my talks and my presentations to be a conversation. It's a conversation with me, not me talking at you. So here are the 3 questions and the possibilities. And I would love for you, even if you're watching the replay, I would love for you to give me your thoughts and your examples. And I think we're going to run these actually as 3 separate posts so that we can really dive deep into each of these questions. But I want to highlight it for today's purposes about talking of and looking at who is responsible for these experiences. Okay, so question 1 is how many of you have had a bad or a customer experience, right? Which ones are they? Are they really bad or it's customer experiences? How many of you had more of those than you've had great ones? Okay, answer possibility 1 is that I've always had fantastic customer experiences where I get the full attention of the salesperson, the waiter, the attendant, and I feel like I'm the most important person in the room. Second option, I sometimes feel that I get a great treatment from the employees where I'm doing business. And the third is it's rare for me to get great, consistent, knowledgeable help and care. So those are the key things. These questions are very specifically worded where to me you can tell my viewpoint that for a great customer experience, it needs to have consistency. It needs to be delivered by employees who are knowledgeable about the product or service that you're offering, that there's care involved in showing that they really want to help you, that they're caring, they're delivering this from heart. It's not just a transaction and they're there to collect the paycheck and get through the day. They really connect with you, that they make you feel like you're the most important person in the room. Okay, so those are the options there. And it was interesting. The majority of people felt that it rode in the middle sometimes. Um, Very few people, in fact, actually, no one said that they always got this great full attention. They felt like they're the most person in the room. Nobody really feels that way. And the majority is that middle of the line. And yet there were quite a few also who said that it's rare for them to get the consistent, knowledgeable help with care. And I think that it's because of those key elements. Okay, moving on. Question number 2 is, where do you think the responsibility lies for having a great customer experience? And this is what I wanted to talk about mostly today. Question Answer number 1 was, it falls on the company. It's the owners, it's the executive leadership, it's the top that's responsible for that experience. And do you know, I think maybe 1 or 2 hands went up for that. I was blown away. So I just thought, okay, that's very interesting. Let's move on. The next option is management. Management is responsible for having that great customer experience, and a lot of hands went up for management. And then the next option is the employees who interact with the customers, and many, many hands went up that it's the responsibility of the employees. D is the customers. The customers are responsible for having a great customer experience. And a lot of hands went up for the customers. And then E was all of the above. So I want to talk for a minute about the fact that there were so many hands that went up on lying the responsibility of creating that experience on the management team and the employees and even the customers themselves. So where do those where do the management where let's start at the top. Where does the management come up with the information that they need to pass on and lead their people, not even just manage them, but lead their people on how to create that great experience? Where are the expectations created? Where's the education put into educating them and then training them on the skill task, but educating them first, you guessed it, on that high value and the core values of your company, how they should speak to people, how they interact with people, right? At a high level. And secondly, okay, that's the management. How do we make sure that the management is getting what they need? Who's responsible for that? Right? There's a chain of what goes on. And if management is hired and they aren't given that information to know, okay, this is what the brand I'm working for now, this is what they believe in. This is the language they want in conveying their brand promise. These are the set of values that are important to them that we have to transmit into our people to create the culture that we want. And then that culture ultimately is going to make you either the employer of choice or not. And then, of course, that gets passed on to the customer. So if you're not teaching that to your management, how can you hold them responsible, right? The expectations that are set. Now, let's address the employees. Are the employees responsible? Well, yes, they are responsible because they're the front line. They're the ones who are the face of your company representing your brand. But again, how can they be responsible if the first step isn't taken care of? If you haven't taken responsibility in investing in their knowledge, in investing in their education, their training for success, how can they possibly be held accountable? How can they be expected to deliver on your promise if you haven't taught them what that promise is? If you haven't taught them how they should engage, if you haven't taught them how to properly grow within the company, there's so many levels, right? And of course, the customers. How can you hold the customers responsible? Well, they're responsible for their part of it, being not being jerks, right? And being rude and nasty, which is happening a lot today, unfortunately. And so they're responsible for their experience in terms of how they communicate and speak. But ultimately, they're paying for a service or a product. So they are really not the ones to be uh, responsible for what your brand delivers. And that's what we're talking about here is who's responsible for the delivery of what your brand promise is about. Your brand promise leads to that experience that happens inside and out, inside being your employees, out being your external customers. And what I found interesting was um, during the talk along the way, another story came up, and I was able to reflect back on this and actually ask again and say, so where does it start? Like, how do we know? How does your management, how do your employees know what it is that they're expected to deliver on? How are they going to create that experience without that? And a woman in the front raised her hand and said, it starts at the top. It starts with us. And I was like, bingo, absolutely. And it was nice to hear it come from someone in the audience and not from me just talking at them. So I want to just leave that with you to think about, that it's not just me talking at you, that this needs to be a conversation that goes on within your companies, within your leadership teams, within your C suite, within your daily huddles, every day with everybody throughout your company, especially at the top, that the responsibility lies there. And then it happens in the daily huddles in terms of what you've decided on that executive leadership level, on that ownership level of taking ownership, that it's your responsibility. When you decide what those key elements are in the values, in the brand promise, in the delivery, in the execution, all of those pieces that go along the employee journey, because that's what I help companies with. I help them figure out, how do we incorporate that into the employee journey? Many are talking about the customer journey, which is very important, but I focus on your employee journey to make sure that ultimately the customer journey will be frictionless and smooth and a happy, wonderful experience where it's almost transparent that all this good stuff is happening in the background because you've had a quality employee experience happening within your company, creating that connection culture. So you see how everything I say every week always ties together, and it's all truly intrinsically related, and it is inseparable. So I'm gonna leave you with that today. I wanted to keep it short and simple, but it's a very important question to think about, who is ultimately responsible. And clearly now you know my thoughts on that. That my point of view is surely that the responsibility and the ownership cannot be passed on to the people you hire if you don't fully establish what that is and clearly communicate and educate that to your people, and not just when they come in to interview, and not just with your onboarding process. Of course, that's crucial, but it has to be contiguous. It has to be consistent throughout their employee journey every day that someone's with you, to for they establish, reinforce, um, really even reassess what's going on in your business, and making sure that it is in alignment with your company high values and what you expect of them, and investing in your people. So I hope that you're able to take something from this today, that if nothing else, it's created a thought process, that it's asked, maybe asking yourself some questions. That's what I hope to do with all my content, is to just get you thinking, to really think about what do we need to do to make these shifts, because the paradigm shifts are happening rapidly and the speed of change is insane. It was always crazy with technology advances, but especially now with the pandemic and everything that's happened, the needs that have come about because of the pandemic, the creativity and the innovation that has come about, which is always a wonderful thing that comes from chaos, and really, I think any sort of crisis, what comes out of that, if we look for the silver lining, is always growth, innovation. And so that's the way I look at things. And I hope that that's helped you just bring some of those things to your mind, to question them, to think about them, to get you thinking. And if you ever want to discuss how this can be implemented in your company, how I may be able to help you. If we're the right fit, we may not be. I invite you to a complimentary conversation. Let me put up my contact information there for you. Jill at jillraff.com. I welcome a conversation. Check out my website, jillraff.com. And again, the last name is Raff, R like Ronald, A like apple pie, and double F like French fry, of course. And let's have that that complimentary conversation about discovering where's this happening in your company? Where do the shifts need to be made? And let's determine whether or not the symptoms are actually the root of the problem, whether the problems that you're having are actually symptoms of a bigger problem, or if in fact those are the problems. So happy to have this discovery call with you. Reach out to me. That is complimentary, no obligation whatsoever. Here to help you. I want to make a bigger impact. So thank you for joining me today. And I want to just encourage you to create great experiences and more every day. Think about your people, prioritize your people. They are the greatest asset you have. And I invite you to join again next week, next Thursday, same time, 12 Central. It's 12 Central Time, 12 noon Central Time on Thursdays. Thanks for joining.